Okay, great. So I think we're going to start in the interest of time. A small group and some other folks might join us. My name is Zold Goldman, and I work in career development as a senior associate director. I'm really excited to be moderating this particular panel on regional differences because I myself have lived in different areas of the country and spent some time outside of the US, so I'm really looking forward to this topic. A couple of really interesting statistics I learned in preparation for today was that according to Out Leadership and the Global Vice Chair at EY, there are about 78 countries where being gay is still illegal, and in the US there are about 29 states where it is still illegal to fire someone based solely on sexual orientation. And in about 34 states, it's still illegal to fire a transgendered employee, which to me was really shocking. So today's panel is really about understanding regional differences. How many of you, by show of hands, are interested in relocating to another state in the US? Possibly on your radar. Okay. Anybody a different country? Okay. So just good to have that sense for our panel. So I'm going to actually ask each of you to introduce yourselves and start us off today. So Max.
This definitely feels like overkill, sorry. So my name is Maxwell, I use he, him, and his. I work as an architect here in Boston. I am also the chair of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. I guess for the purposes of this panel, I've mostly lived in the Northeast. I've spent most of my life living and working in Boston. I was raised in New Jersey, so definitely mid-Atlantic, Northeast sensibilities. But right after graduating college, I lived for 2 years in Alaska. So I'm happy to talk about that.
Great.
I think so. Some of the people on the previous panel, but like I said, I'm a pediatric hematologist by training. I'm working now in Boston and Biogen, but I've lived all over. I'm originally from Panama, so I lived there. I lived in Mexico for a few years. I came to the U.S. in 2000, and in the U.S., through my medical training, I've been in different places. So I lived in Miami, then in Houston, then New Orleans, and now here. And we can talk about it in more detail, but like you said, actually one of the countries where it's illegal to be gay is Panama. And it is a big, like Panama City, which is the main part, is a big city. It seems, progressive in a way, but it's still illegal. And that, and they've tried to take that law off, and it hasn't happened. A lot of it with the church, etc. But it's a really bad feeling to have that law there. And those, I certainly knew coming here and seeing the difference, I did not want to go back, to be honest, and I made my career here. But so we can talk more about that. But and even inside the U.S., there's big differences, obviously, depending on where you're living, and I've noticed that. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Yes, very intense mic. So my name is Madina Agenor. I am an assistant professor at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, which is right up the street. And I was originally, I was born in Martinique, which is in the French West Indies. And I am half Martinique and half Haitian. So I grew up with those two influences in my household. Also, I would say Haitian, from a Haitian Catholic father. So that had a big influence as well. I moved to DC when I was 6 years old after living in the UK and in Haiti, and have since then lived up and down the East Coast, DC, New York, and Boston, and have observed interesting differences in all of those cities, even though you might think, okay, major northeastern cities, similarities, there are a lot of stark differences that I'm happy to talk about later. And I will stop there.
Hi folks, my name is Elizabeth. I use she, her, hers pronouns. And I have lived mostly in the Northeast. I have spent a considerable amount of time in the rural Northeast, which is an experience all its own, and also have spent time in some major cities in the Northeast and Midwest. I went to graduate school in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and also lived in Copenhagen, Denmark for a semester during college. So have those experiences to draw from. Thanks.
Great. So I think we're going to ask a few questions just to get us started, and then open it up. My hope is to open it up to your questions. And so I know each of the panelists has talked a little bit about where they have resided before, but can you talk a little bit more about what it was like in the different regions you've worked in terms of your identities?
So after I graduated college, I went to Boston University. I specifically signed up to join AmeriCorps, and I wanted to join AmeriCorps because I specifically wanted to do something for the country, and I had some political grievances with the Peace Corps system, and I specifically wanted to go someplace within the domestic United States which is as far away as I could get, because I really did want to sample a type of life that I had never ever experienced before, and that pretty much took me to Alaska. There were 2 AmeriCorps programs in Alaska, and one of them was working for the Girl Scouts, so I got to work for the Girl Scouts for 2 years. That was fun and interesting. Alaska is incredibly rural. Even though I lived in a city in Alaska, the city that I lived in, which is called Ketchikan, is pretty much about the population of, say, Brookline. It's very small, and even though I grew up in a suburban part of New Jersey, living in a very rural community was very different to anything I'd experienced. I was known immediately as the Girl Scout lady, which did all sorts of things to my gender identity. And it traveled with me into every single town that I went into. And so they didn't know my name, they didn't know my gender, they didn't know my race. They just made assumptions about who I was based on my work. And because I was working for the Girl Scouts, which is a youth-based kind of paramilitary organization, I was not allowed to pretty much have a personal life. And so I was not allowed to be social, I was not allowed to be seen in bars, et cetera, et cetera. And literally I would walk down the street and people would shout at me, "Hey, there's the Girl Scout lady," which became very oppressive after a while. It just meant that I could not have any type of personal life. Any other questions?
I think that for me, just the biggest contrast is growing from Panama to the United States. And, when I was there, especially, I did my medical school there, and then coming here, I was not out in medical school. It was at the end of the 90s, I guess. Oh, okay. People, like my friends, I would always hear derogatory words against gay people, and you're just like hearing this, but at the same time, it was a very different environment from today. But I think there's still no comparison from the rights that even though we need even more rights here, compared to the rights that we have here to a country like Panama. And again, don't get me wrong, I have gay friends in Panama that are out and they're not actively being, harmed or anything like that. But there's still such a big difference from there to here that for me to consider, I know some of you guys said you're considering going out of the country. Right now, even though I wouldn't feel unsafe in Panama or anything like that, and my family's supportive and friends, I just see such a striking difference from here in a lot of ways, but from a sexual orientation way, and that will still be very difficult for me to go back. So that's just a word of, not of caution, but of you making sure you inform yourself very well about that before you make a decision to go to another country.
So I would say that the place where I lived, where I felt most comfortable being myself and expressing myself at both the intersection of sexual orientation and race ethnicity was New York City. And the major reason for that was that there were folks who were from all over the world, all types of different expressions around gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, you name it. A whole host of different languages. So I never felt like an outsider in New York. I always felt like I could express myself in the way that I wanted to. And for me, I was just on the hair and attire panel, so this is fresh in my brain. For me, that usually meant things like, you know, being able to wear bright colors and lots of jewelry and lots of accessories, and that was something that I felt was really important to me. And moving to New England, I've definitely noticed a change in my style. Probably, you know, the kind of what I perceive to be the culture of New England that's, you know, more muted, a little bit more rooted in the Puritan past of the state. And so I've noticed that my colors have gotten a lot less bright. Probably also because it's really cold and it gets dark at 3 o'clock, right? So all these kind of environmental factors have influenced the way that I express myself and the norms as well. So that's one observation. And I have noticed also that when I go to Martinique, which is my home country, and other Caribbean places as well, that I personally feel more pressure to conform to more traditional gender norms in the sense of, you know, women dressed very feminine in the sense of wearing, you know, dresses and skirts and like things like that. I have noticed a few gender nonconforming folks and folks who maybe transgress gender norms around you know, having a same-sex partner in recent years, so it might be changing, but I know that for me, I definitely feel like I have to ascribe to traditional norms around femininity a lot more when I'm there compared to when I'm here.
I would say the place that I felt most comfortable, I moved from, like I said, I've spent a lot of my life in rural places in the Northeast, and made the choice after being in a job that wasn't really satisfying, in the middle of nowhere, feeling really isolated. The reflection that came from that isolation helped me to realize that I needed to move. And I moved to Western Mass, near Northampton, which is known as a place where lesbians and queer women in particular congregate. And I moved there because of that reason, and knew that I needed that kind of community, and sought out work at a women's college, also an enclave for queer women, and being clear about the reasons for moving to a place really helped me to find the community that I was seeking.
So excellent advice in terms of reflecting on what's important to you and understanding the various laws and the region that you're going to. So related to better understanding the region that you're going to and kind of what you needed to do to get settled, anyone want to talk a little bit or can speak to a little bit how you found a place to live, how you found affirming you know, medical health professionals, the stuff of which getting settled is partially involved in. Who would like to take that? Elizabeth, you want to start us, or?
Sure. So I would say it wasn't really until I moved to Boston that I found that I knew that I needed care, specifically mental health care, rooted with a therapist who knew about queer issues and who understood intersectionality, and someone who was able to listen to me from that vantage point. And so I was lucky enough to know people in Boston already, so asking queer community that I had in Boston already for those resources. Also turning to social media, things like Boston Queer Exchange, people at MIT where I work, chatting with them about resources that exist in the community. I think, again, that to go back to the importance of reflection and thoughtfulness about what my needs are, being able to give that a lot of thought and sit with what that means and grow more confident in the fact that it's okay for me to have particular needs around medical care and mental health care, and then operate from that place of this is what I need, that I deserve care that is appropriate to my needs. There's privilege that comes with that vantage point, and that's worth mentioning. But if you are able to operate from that place, I found that I've been able to get the care that I need that understands the nuances of my experience. But it took a lot of reflection and confidence and vulnerability in asking for what I need.
I want to say, I think we're lucky in Boston. I mean, we have all the resources that we need. It's just looking for them, but it's not even hard. And even from a medical perspective, STD prevention, or all of those things that are important. I think that there are other places where it's not as and we have the best medical centers here and community organizations, and it's really I met people at Mass General that work with different kind of programs and really provide a lot of support. And I know for gay men, it's important to have good, mental health, and I'm talking as a gay man, sexual health, being responsible about that, having a physician to talk about those issues. So here, I think it's you just have to be responsible, and you will find, and there's medical organizations that will do it. But comparing to other cities and other places where you may live, it may not be as easy, and so that could be a challenge depending on where you're living. And that's an important part. Like as a gay man, that's an important part of my life.
What was it like for you in Texas or
So
some of the other places?
I can see the big contrast, right? Even though in Texas, I got lucky in the sense that I always lived in big cities. So I was in Houston, and actually Houston, the city per se, has a lot of resources. New Orleans also. So, but comparing those two, I know, for example, they don't have programs for transgender young children or teenagers. Like I think we have those things in Boston. So it's still at a different level. So like I said, we are lucky here. I don't think in New Orleans we were getting better, but not to the same level. So smaller cities are not going to have as many opportunities, and so I think it makes a big difference where you are. Even inside the United States, can we go from one extreme to the other?
Thanks.
So I would say moving here from New York City was really difficult for me, and it took me several years before I felt like I could find the resources that I needed in the community that I needed. So I would just say that it took a lot of patience and a lot of perseverance. And what I mean by that is that when I was living in New York, I felt like I found communities that reflected the intersection of my identities. So I had a lot of Black queer friends, and I felt really comfortable in those spaces. When I moved to Boston, I found that the communities were a lot smaller and also much more siloed. So I had a lot of queer white friends and also a lot of black heterosexual friends, but I didn't have a lot of black queer friends. And that was a really, really big challenge for me, and it made me feel very alone in the city. So one of the ways that I think I was able to cope with that was through word of mouth and through social media. I don't know if Meetup is still a thing, but I definitely did that when I first moved here 12 years ago. And also, so meeting just one person was really incredible, because that allowed me to figure out, well, where are the neighborhoods that I feel most comfortable living, and where should I hang out, and can you introduce me to other people? And I just want to reiterate that for me, it took a lot of time. And so not to get discouraged if you find yourself in a position where it's taking time. But I felt really grateful for meeting kind of one or two people at first through a whole host of activities, I think we're going to get to that later, that helped me feel more connected to the city. The other thing that I want to say was that it did take some trial and error. So I lived in neighborhoods that I absolutely hated. I won't name them, but lived there for a little bit, realized it wasn't for me because I felt like I wasn't seeing myself in the folks who were around in that neighborhood, and I felt really isolated and like I didn't belong. To the point where now, after living in 4 different neighborhoods, I have finally found one that I really love. But again, a lot of trial and error and patience. And yeah. Stop there.
So, as these fine folks were just chatting, I was trying to think about how much I was going to disclose to you, and I think I'm going to come down on the yes, I'm going to disclose to you. So I moved to Alaska almost immediately after college, and I was essentially a young adult and trying to figure out what the hell that meant, as well as figuring out my gender identity. But when I was 18 years old, and I was 21 years old, and I had just moved to this very rural place where I did not know anything. And one of the first things that I had to do, that I knew I had to do, was I needed to find a doctor. And I remember sitting in my office, and there was a magnet on the desk that was there. I inherited the desk, and it was for an OBGYN in the town. And I was like, okay, I'm an adult. I need to take care of my body parts. People don't think that trans men have to take care of their body parts. We have to take care of our body parts. So I needed to find an OBGYN. And it was the first time I ever done this as an adult. It was terrifying. But I literally saw this magnet on my desk and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go there. I don't think I've ever really recovered from that experience. It was terrible and scary, and I had to do it alone. But I felt brave because I did it, because I knew that that was adulting. When I returned back from Alaska, I had the privilege of health insurance, and so I needed to shop around again for health care. And I used word of mouth this time. I didn't just use a magnet stuck to my desk. I asked friends who I knew who were trans-identified, saying, I need to find a doctor, I need to find, mental health practitioners, I need to figure out where to live, I need to figure out where to get my hair cut. And all those things, I was thankful to rely on other people in the community who I had heard, were out as trans people and could give me those recommendations, and I was very thankful for that. Now, obviously, there's the internet, and so you can just Google stuff, but having that direct connection through a human being who's like, oh, I go see this person, I give them the thumbs up, made a huge difference, because it meant that I would trust this person, this stranger who I was literally going to put my own safety, security, and personal health into their hands. And it was really important to me that I did get that personal recommendation.
Thank you. So that brings up a really good point, which is how do you find supportive community, not only at work, but outside of work? So Max, you want to start us off, and then other people can.
Sure. So now we live in an age of social media, which is both a curse and a blessing. My personal Facebook feed is an echo chamber of people who think like me, who have similar politics, have similar values, and I'm okay with that. when I first moved back to Boston, I had friends here because I went to college here, and so I found my community through friends and friends. You know, this old school social networking method, which was going to parties and meeting people in the world, and that really did form the foundation of my support system here in town. It helped me get a job. It helped me, you know, find a place to live. It eventually introduced me to my partner, and so having those community connections was absolutely fundamental to making sure that I would get the support that I needed to take care of my own needs, and then turn around and start to be able to contribute back to the community that I was in. Yeah, literally, I did do meetups. I Googled queer Asians and I found Quappa. Yeah, it was really just about trying to find people who were similar to me and had similar values, and trying to get myself to where those people were. Sometimes it meant going to bars, sometimes it meant going to theaters and restaurants, but I tried to spend a lot of time not saying no. So it essentially meant that I put myself in lots of situations that I wouldn't necessarily have found myself in previously.
Yeah, I think that I agree, and I think there's, as a gay man, there's a lot more resources, so it's not, you know, it's more out, more out there, and so, there's more information. I think from as a transgender person, probably encounter more obstacles, etc. But still, like you were saying, community and is the most important. I mean, I met people here, friends from friends, and then you're talking and people that you trust, and like who's your physician, or where do you go for this, where do you go for that, and I think. But that's probably how it will go in any community. You find, the people that you feel comfortable with, and go with that. But I also agree that there may be a lot of trial and error in some situations, and just don't get. If you have a bad experience the first time, I mean, you eventually will find somebody that whatever you're looking for will help you. But yes, trial and error. I mean, like anything, I guess. So just be ready for that. If that would be the only other thing.
Yeah. So in addition to meetups, I also got involved in a dance company. So I've been dancing for my whole life since I was 3 years old, and it's something I really love. And I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with people around a passion that's not your work or what you do on a daily basis, but something you're really passionate about that allows you to meet folks from lots of different backgrounds who all share this passion. So you can all come together and build a community. So that was really, really important to me. So I would suggest thinking about something you're passionate about and trying to connect with other folks who are also passionate about that. That was very helpful in my experience. And then the other thing I want to say is that the going out, actually getting out there and meeting people was absolutely key to me, but it required me to take a first step, which was to kind of make sure that I had my mental health and spiritual life together so that I could put myself out there, because that's really scary. And also, if you're feeling, well, in my case, I was feeling alone, and like I didn't have the connections I needed. So first, I needed to find some mental health support, some spiritual support to get me to a place where I felt like I could say yes to invitations, like I could put myself out there to meet new people. So that's something that I had to do. And then once I did that, that's really when I started taking taking the opportunities that were in front of me to make connections and build community, and that was really, really critical. Again, meeting through friends of friends. So that was my experience.
I'll also say, for me, learning to be kind to myself, it took me a long time to be able to approach most anything from that angle, but I found trying to strike a balance between being kind and gentle with myself, and also having the courage to, so I mentioned this in the last panel that I was a part of, I'm a pretty introverted person, and don't do small talk. Small talk is not something that I tend to be very comfortable with. So finding a balance between doing what I could and also really stepping outside of my comfort zone and making the decision to say, this feels awkward right now, and I don't really want to do this, but I found that eventually the awkwardness dissipated, and when I had the courage to go out or to meet someone for coffee or to go to a meetup, I've done a bunch of those myself, I found that when I came home, I said, I'm so glad that I did that. I met someone I wouldn't have met otherwise, or really made this great connection, or I would often feel the euphoria that, I don't know if anybody else in the room has felt this when finding kind of your people. If I hadn't had the courage to leave my apartment, I wouldn't have had that really exciting rush of, oh my gosh, these are my people. Like, I'm not alone, and I can keep moving toward finding community and not feeling so isolated. But it did take a lot of courage and conviction in moments where I would have rather stayed on the couch.
I mean, it's wonderful. I love all of our panel's comments, and the idea of being kind and balancing, knowing what you're up for, what you're game for, with stepping outside your comfort zone is a great insight. I know when I was relocating, I used city data. What other resources? Some of you have mentioned meetups. What other resources have all of you used, or would you recommend?
So I work in higher education, so at colleges and universities, and getting a sense for and I would say that this goes even if you work in an industry outside of an educational institution, seeing what resources, if there are universities or colleges in your community, seeing what resources exist there. Often those resources are public. Events that happen on campuses are often open to the public, so even if you don't have an explicit affiliation with a school, you can typically take advantage of those resources in some ways. And getting a sense for being able to Google those kinds of offices, getting a sense for what supports exist in that community. That worked for me in particular because I work in higher education, I've worked at colleges and universities, so getting a sense for who my colleagues would be, who I could turn to if I needed support, had questions about resources. So in that way, being able to Google and find community resources was really helpful. Also, being able to rely on social media has been huge. I would say those are the biggest things for me.
I think, like, also, depending on where you're working, you can look just right there. Where I work, I'm in biotech, and I got invited to a LGBTQ. We do meetups for LGBTQ individuals in biotech industry, and it's once a month. And I make sure to go to that, especially that being that I'm new in the city and in the industry. So I've met a lot of interesting people, made connections, professionals. I developed friends from that, so make sure to go to that. There's other activities in my company around these so you just to keep your ears, your eyes open, and like everybody has said, put yourself out there. I think it's super, super important. That has helped me tremendously.
I guess the only thing I would add is don't underestimate the power of volunteering. You can get sucked into a lot of communities really quickly by volunteering your time. I'm looking at you, Michelle. I mean, just, volunteer for the local film festival or the dance team, and it just quickly spirals into a larger and larger connection network.
Okay. I would love to open it up for questions, just to make sure everyone has that opportunity. What kinds of questions do people have? And Nate's going to go around and, yep.
In terms of resources for looking for somewhere,
in terms of resources, for when you're looking for somewhere where you want to move, like whether it be out of the country or within the country, what would you recommend using?
So I'm just going to repeat that because I know we're being videotaped. So the question was in terms of resources, whether you're thinking about moving within the country or outside of the country, what resources would you recommend?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think whenever you take a large risk like relocation, you need to prioritize what's the most important. Some people would say it's work, some people would say it's housing. I think that it's personally most important to have secure and stable housing first, because it's intrinsic to making sure that you can access all sorts of other resources. I definitely have used the internet very strongly for trying to find those types of resources, especially referrals from friends, as I mentioned before. I mean, we live in a very global world now, and so just putting out a call like, hey, I'm thinking about moving to Berlin, has anybody lived there, has anyone know any resources there, and then you'll get connected to friends of a friend who's in a private Facebook group who wants chatted with this person. And so the kindness of strangers is really surprising sometimes in those situations. But yeah, I do think it's really important to prioritize what is absolutely basically necessary. Like, you don't need to move all your stuff right away, but maybe you need your computer, and therefore you probably should have Wi-Fi access. So.
I agree. I think it's doing your homework before, meaning really researching. Social media is very helpful. Talking to friends, for me, everywhere I move, the most important thing is, and you'll be surprised, like if you start talking to people, yeah, I know somebody that lived there, I know somebody that was there, here, email them, whatever, but really getting the information that you need to make your particular decision. But I definitely will say that, you don't want any surprises, and I think you can make get all the information that you need to make your decision if you start early enough and just talk to people and find out, and I certainly will see that's one of the key ways.
One of the things I do before moving specifically to a new state is I'll look up the policies that they have around sexual orientation, gender, race, ethnicity, based discrimination. As you know, not all states have protections around sexual orientation discrimination, especially in employment and housing and things like that. So I try to do my research around the policy landscape. And then the other thing that I would recommend that I haven't actually used but I think might be useful is going through the alumni network of your university. I don't know if Northeast or wherever you are has a LGBTQ alum kind of resource, but I'm sure that they do, or someone could point you in that direction. But I would suggest reaching out to alumni and seeing what their experiences have been.
Other questions? Yeah.
Question. We don't always get to honor all of our wishes when we have to make a move for a job. Like maybe we have a great opportunity to take a job somewhere in a place we never thought we wanted to live. have any of you had that situation where you moved for an opportunity, or you ended up somewhere for an opportunity, and you weren't really excited about the place that you were going to be? How did you reconcile that in terms of your identity and make peace with your location if you were there for different reasons?
I went through that struggle in my mind not too long ago, and I think it's all very personal and very, if you're at a stage in your life where you need that job for a couple of years to jump up, are you going to sacrifice your, social personal life? Is a very personal decision. But I think, from being in different places, you don't want to be miserable, So it's always a personal decision. But I got offered a really, really good job like a year and a half ago in Phoenix. And I went and I saw Phoenix, and I mean, nothing against Phoenix, it's nice, but it wasn't going to be what was going to make me happy in my personal life. And that was part of researching and talking to people and going there, and also looking at the work environment. There was no gay-friendly organization. I mean, this was a hospital, but I could see the people that work there, no sin bajo, just very traditional, different. So I just held on, and it was, it would have been a good opportunity, monetary-wise, whatever, but I didn't want to be miserable. I waited, and 1 year later, I got the opportunity to come to Boston, which was really, I wasn't thinking of Boston. When I looked at the whole thing, it made everything that I wanted. So I could have made a wrong decision, and it took a lot of thinking, and it's very personal, but I just felt like, at least at this point in my life, I didn't want to be miserable for a job. But if you're in another, very young and it's a great opportunity for a limited time, maybe. It's a personal decision. But yeah.
So my time in Alaska taught me that I can pretty much do anything for at least for a year. I mean, what we're talking about is perpetual cost-benefit analysis. And I walk through life pretty much always weighing, is the cost of this outweighing the benefits? And the moment when that tips is the moment I'm out. I think that when I was living in a really rural community and life was very hard for me, it helped me to scale out and to not think about the one thing that was making me so incredibly miserable, to think in a slightly grander scheme or think with a slightly different perspective. And then I was able to find another thing that was helpful or would support me. And so I became really good friends with the public library when I was living in Alaska because I had no friends. But it meant that I had this really great relationship that I was able to form with public libraries, with librarians, as well as with literature. But I mean, I think that as we're trying to live our lives, become adults, become full in that identity, you're always kind of struggling with, is this too much or is it not? And then what is the other thing that can tip the scale, really?
I think what I would say is that having had that experience before, having the opportunity to experience isolation and moments of misery, something that really got me through was being able to use that time. I spent a while just being miserable, and once I realized that I couldn't effectively do that for much longer, I then started using my imagination about what I wanted my life to be. And I wasn't sure how attainable that was in terms of, would it be possible to go where I want the most? I wasn't sure whether that was realistic, but I let my mind wander there, and that was really powerful to just sort of surrender myself to my imagination about what I wanted my life to be. And I used that time to then move to a place where I could be planful, about, okay, so this is what I want my life to be. How can I bring that to fruition? And use the next several months to find where I wanted to go next, and look at the jobs that were in that area, and reach out to people who worked at those places, and really through email networking and stepping outside of my comfort zone in that way, being really transparent with people and saying, this is what I want for myself, and this is what I have to offer. Like, how can we work together? And being able to kind of live in that place of possibility, and get there through first experiencing deep isolation and misery and some depression and anxiety, to be frank. Like, living in that place helped me to imagine what I wanted for myself and go after it.
So we probably have time for maybe just one or two more questions. When you're thinking about going either overseas or whether you want to relocate outside of the Boston area, is anyone here wondering about safety? Like, was there a time during your experiences where safety was ever an issue, either at work or outside of work or living in the community?
So I will say that one thing I will give you as unsolicited advice is to be aware of your privilege. If you're thinking about traveling out overseas, bear in mind that the culture that you're traveling to is completely different than what you were raised in. And so they may have different standards of human rights, for that example, and different understandings about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And that breaks down especially on gender. And so I did have a little bit of experience where living in rural communities I was worried about my safety, but I was still in the United States, and so therefore I had the understanding that nothing was really truly going to be terrible for me. They had a really bizarre sense of racial politics in the place where I lived in, and so that was also casting a strange light on the things that I did, and very, very, very bizarre gender politics where I lived. And so it did make me conscious of the places that I went to, but the town that I lived in was a rough and tumble Wild West town where we hung out in this fisherman's bar where there were drug runners who were regular customers and became our friends. But it never translated into direct safety concerns for me. But I was always conscious of the places that I went into and the privilege that I carried with me.
Just to add to that, I think that, yeah, you have a very good point that most places where you are in the United States, even in rural, I mean, there are laws that for the most part, I mean, in general, laws are followed in this country. So, anything can happen anywhere, but I always feel that kind of safety. And it's not the same case in other countries at all. So, I think there's also a rating, I can't remember, it's like from the US government on human rights, and they specifically look at gay, transgender issues, and they talk about issues in each specific country, and you can look that up. I know of people that, because their country has such poor, laws or so many crimes against it, they've been able to actually gain U.S. residency or etc. because it was so safe in their own countries, and these are not necessarily Middle Eastern countries per se. They are countries that I was surprised. So that's a resource that you can just to get an idea. But yeah, I think that you're stepping out. You may not, have all the protection that we used to hear here. So it's just something to keep in mind. At the same time, like, I don't want to like be scared. I mean, I travel all over the world. I love to travel, and I have never had a bad experience in that sense. Maybe once, and it was in France. So France, you were sick, so that anything can happen anywhere. So, but you just have to keep it in mind, I guess.
In terms of safety, I actually have not experienced safety concerns around sexual orientation, but definitely around race, ethnicity, specifically around racial discrimination and exclusion, and definitely anxiety and fear and concern for both physical but also emotional safety, which is something that we haven't really talked about, but that is certainly a major issue in navigating different spaces. The emotional distress that can come from walking into a room and you being the only one of fill in the blank, right? So we've all experienced that in one way or another, especially being from marginalized identities, where it does make you feel, or it's made me feel really, really concerned for my well-being. So I know that for me, thinking about living in places and moving in spaces where I don't feel that type of exclusion has been really important, and I think it's really influenced where I move to and where I live. So that's been something that I've considered in my decision making, throughout my career.
Okay. So I think one of the things is keep the sense of adventure, use social media, use your resources, connect with other folks, look for ERG groups at work or the HRC ratings that I think was referred to. And I really want to, in summary, a couple of things. One is I really want to thank our panelists for sharing such a personal part of their life and their decisions along the way. So I really appreciate it, and I think we should give them a round of applause. Thank you very, very, very much. I think all of you, right, are going to be part of the professional in residence. So I would encourage anyone here who wants some individual time to sign up outside for the professional in residence so that you can take advantage of this very unique and wonderful opportunity. And there will be a co-op panel right here as part of lunch, which is going to happen momentarily. So thank you very, very much for being such a great group. Thank you very much for being such a great panel.